From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips. We're privileged to have as our guest for this broadcast Bill Gertz, the leading national security journalist in the United States of America. Bill is the author of the best-selling book Betrayal, and he has another book out called The China Threat, which I believe promises also to be a bestseller. Bill, I know that you're feared by those in the government who want to keep their improper activities quiet if they're in the defense area. You've been the leading critic through your factual reporting of efforts by certain elements of the federal government to appease, assuage, accommodate communist China. How did you develop this as your beat? How did you develop your expertise?
Well, I've been a reporter in Washington for 15 years, and during that time I've succeeded in developing good lines of communication, I guess I'll say, into the government. And I've really become kind of a go-to guy for getting information out. It's a job that I relish, that I love. I work hard, but my job is fun. And I really feel that I've been able to uncover a lot of things that, had they not been reported in the Washington Times, would have been covered up or played down, and that we would never have known about them.
Well, let's cut to the chase on China. You call it a threat, the China threat. If my memory serves, Bill Clinton said that Communist China is our strategic partner, and George W. Bush said that Communist China is our strategic competitor. What is your view of Communist China?
Well, as the title suggests, I think China is a threat. Let me explain how I came up with the title. A couple of years ago, I was working on an article for the Washington Times on the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese military. I was in the Pentagon. I was getting some briefings from some experts, and was called into the office of a three-star general, sat down across the table from him, and he said, "Bill, you know, China is not a threat." And I said, "Well, General, why do you believe that?" And he said, "Because of their statements," essentially. I'm paraphrasing him. And I was astounded because I know the Pentagon in particular, of all the U.S. government, is usually the most hard line. They go by capabilities. If a country has nuclear weapons, you've got to make your defense assessments based on the fact that they will use them. So here was a senior military officer telling me that he didn't think a country whose nuclear missiles are pointed at the United States is a threat. It was characteristic of a mindset and a pervasive, almost a mantra around government, that China is not a threat. And I decided that I had heard it so much, I believe that it is part of a strategic deception that emanates from Beijing. I think that it has permeated the highest levels of our government and our academic community. And I decided to write a book putting the pieces together in a very factual way to explain what I think is really the China threat.
What are those pieces?
Well, you have, first of all, you have the internal part, which is communist ideology. China today remains a communist dictatorship. This is considered an unpleasant fact by the establishment today. They don't like to be reminded that the Chinese communists are responsible for the deaths of between 30 and 60 million people. Just 2 weeks before Christmas, we saw evidence of that, further evidence of that, of the Chinese government blowing up, destroying some 450 churches in southern China. Chinese ideology has changed from Mao's Marxism-Leninism. The Chinese have recognized that their economic system doesn't work. They've changed the economy, but they haven't changed the political characteristics of that, and that's really where that's really at the heart of the China threat.
A great many supposedly conservative politicians say that free trade, access to American markets, free enterprise systems will transform communist China. What would you say to them?
That is the prevailing argument now for both the left and the right for doing business with China. My point is that it hasn't worked. China today is becoming more repressive. Its military is becoming stronger. Its People's Armed Police, the Internal Security Service, is getting stronger, and it's all being done with U.S. technology. The argument has been, well, if we trade with China, it will become a democracy. We see now that that hasn't worked, and the reason it hasn't worked is that trading hasn't been followed by the internal component, which is demands for democratization. That's really the solution. And again, if we're trading with them, what we're really doing, in effect, is strengthening a dictatorship that is seeking to dominate all of Asia and ultimately a good part of the world.
This is a paraphrase, but I recall Jiang having said, we'll do anything we have to strengthen the economy, but we will never surrender control.
Yes, they've made, excuse me, they've made quite clear that there will be no democratization. They look at democratization as an alien Western concept, and they are taking steps. They have a long-term strategy. The Chinese are working very hard to build what they call their national power. They even have a quantification for it. But as part of that national power, they have to fool the rest of the world while they're in this weak state, primarily because of their own system, Cultural Revolution in particular. And Deng Xiaoping epitomized this in the phrase, bide our time, build our capabilities. And thus, Chinese diplomats around the world are one of their highest priority, their intelligence officers too, is to monitor what they call the China threat theory around the world. They predict that by 2020, the United States will recognize China as a threat. I hope it happens much sooner than that. But they understand, they call that the dangerous decade, from 2020 to 2030, because they know the U.S. will recognize China as a threat, but they won't be ready to confront us militarily in particular until 2030.
Now, we have a mutual friend, Roger Robinson, who served on Ronald Reagan's National Security Council staff. And Roger has said to me that he believes that communist China can be a greater threat to the United States than the Soviet Union ever was because of its economic power around the world.
Absolutely. There's no question in my mind, and having researched this, I think there is no bigger national security problem facing the country than China. And it hasn't been recognized. Everything has been done in just the opposite direction. Under the Clinton administration in particular, the going-in position is treat China as a normal nation, not as a communist dictatorship. And we've learned from the 20th century that communist governments don't respond well to concessions. They pocket them, they demand more, and they move forward with their own internal goals. I think it's going to, the next president, whoever it is, it looks like it will be George W. Bush, will have their most important test when it comes to China. And that test is a very real test right now in the Taiwan Strait, which I describe in the book as the Flashpoint Taiwan, the biggest danger for current U.S.-China relations.
Douglas MacArthur characterized Formosa, beautiful island, another name for Taiwan, as a giant aircraft carrier floating in the Pacific. And as long as that aircraft carrier, that island, is independent of mainland control, the ability of Red China to be imperialistic is to some degree restrained. What is the likelihood, in your view, that by fair means or foul, peacefully or militarily, mainland China will be able to incorporate Taiwan in the foreseeable future?
Very likely. And the danger has increased during the past 7 years under the so-called strategic ambiguity policy. This is a policy laid out or magnified by the Clinton administration as maybe we will defend Taiwan, maybe we won't defend Taiwan from a mainland attack. This, to me, has increased the instability. The Chinese are engaged in a major military buildup. They're deploying hundreds of short-range missiles opposite Taiwan. They're building new air defense facilities. These are not balsa wood decoys. These is real military hardware. The policy has been, as I said, ambiguity. This is a dangerous policy. History has taught us that. In 1950, the South Koreans were excluded from the defense
outside
perimeter.
our defense perimeter, said Mr. Atchison.
Right, and that prompted the invasion by North Korea and the Korean War. More recently, in 1990, our ambassador to Baghdad, April Glasspie, told Saddam Hussein, we're not interested in your border disputes with Kuwait. Within a few weeks, Iraqi tanks were in downtown Kuwait City, and we had the Gulf War. In the same way, the Taiwan Strait instability has increased because the Clinton administration has been unwilling to provide defensive weapons to Taiwan and to state clearly that they would defend Taiwan from attack.
It seems to me that in the Republic of China and Taiwan, there exists the same problem or a problem similar to that which we have in the United States. Business interests which put profit ahead of patriotism. To what degree do you think the will of Taiwan to resist mainland encroachment has been undermined by increased business cooperation between the mainland and Taiwan?
I think in a major way. There is a lot of capital flight going from Taiwan to the mainland. I'm certain, in my view, that this is the result of the fact that there are hundreds of short-range missiles being deployed opposite the island. The Taiwanese are demoralized because they haven't been supported. This is a democracy, a prosperous democracy. It is a democratic dagger pointed at the heart of Beijing, and it is a threat to China by its very existence. And that's the real problem. Arms sales to Taiwan have been virtually cut off by the Clinton administration. There's been a total reluctance.
Even when we sell them, we keep them here, and they can only retrieve them when it's too late.
Right. Just in the past few days, the Taiwan delegation is in town for their annual arms sale request, and the Clinton administration is going to make sure that they're not going to sell them any real defensive weapons because they don't want to offend the dictators in Beijing.
When we come back after these messages, I'm going to ask Bill Gertz, author of The China Threat, whether he thinks the mainland Chinese, the communists, will attempt to take Taiwan by force or whether they can do it peacefully. And if they do move by force, what should the policy of the United States be? Stay with us. Hello, I'm Howard Phillips. The Conservative Caucus has been actively fighting since 1974 for less expensive government and lower taxes imposed upon the American people by the federal government. If you want to become part of our effort to reduce the size and cost and regulatory burden of the federal government, I hope you will call the number shown on your screen.
For more information about the Conservative Caucus, write us at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia 22180, or call 703-938-9626. Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with award-winning journalist Bill Gertz, author of what we think will be a bestseller, The China Threat. Bill, if Communist China were to launch military action against Taiwan, what could the United States do? What should it do? After all, when we sent an aircraft carrier there a few years ago, they threatened to launch nuclear weapons against Los Angeles.
Right now, from a military standpoint, we're in trouble. I remember last year when their tensions were heightened over the statements of Lee Deng-Wei about state-to-state relations. I ran into a general at a conference, and I asked him, I said, well, are you dusting off the war plans to defend Taiwan? And he looked at me and said, what plans? Basically, there's a real problem there. There was legislation put in the last Defense Appropriations Bill calling on the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Command to tell Congress what plans and what capabilities the U.S. has for defending Taiwan. As of today, in December of 2000, those plans have not been presented to the Congress. It would be a disaster if we didn't defend Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act, basically our law governing relations with Taiwan, says basically we are to prevent the forcible reunification of the island by the mainland. The consequences of not defending Taiwan would be an utter disaster for Asia. The Japanese would immediately accommodate, as would most other of our friends in the region.
Let's talk about the region, Southeast Asia. Right now, the United States is the dominant power in that region, and that is very upsetting to the folks in Beijing. To what degree does national history and present capability enable the governments, and present intention, enable the governments in Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, to resist aggression by Communist China, not just physical aggression, not just military aggression, but questions about the Spratly Islands, questions about the oil in the South China Sea. To what degree can these other countries assert their own prerogatives absent clear backup from the United States?
Very little. The United States is the backbone for any kind of a security arrangement in Asia. The Chinese know that. They're doing everything they can to undermine the United States. They want the United States out of Asia. They want to be the dominant power in Asia, and they want every nation in Asia to go to China first before it does anything. I think if you look at the sea lanes, specifically in the South China Sea, a good percentage of the world's trade transits through that water. They know that. They're building strategic outposts in that region. This is something that is not liked by the pro-China academic community when you discuss Chinese military buildup on Woody Island, the dispute over the Spratlys, and so on. It shows that China is not this benevolent panda bear that its supporters try to make it out to be. The Chinese are chess players. They play a game called Go. They think many years in the future. They think strategically, and they are acting strategically. And
they're laying their pieces down all over the world. Even a casual glance at Foreign Broadcast Information Service reports show them operating in Africa, show them in the Bahamas, show them in Vancouver, British Columbia, and they don't merely operate through companies that say, we are the People's Liberation Army. As in the case in Panama, they operate through front companies which are controlled by the People's Liberation Army, such as Hutchison Whampoa.
The Panama Canal, I think, is the most visible case, and I have a whole chapter in the China thread on this. I call it Panama Red. Trent Lott, the Senate Majority Leader, is somewhat of a hero on this for bringing that to public attention. He wrote a letter to the Pentagon and said basically it appears that the Chinese have taken control of the Panama Canal without firing a shot. What has happened is this company, a Hong Kong-based company, Hutchison Whampoa, whose chairman is Li Ka-shing. I was able to uncover intelligence documents that show that Li Ka-shing has close ties to the mainland. These two port facilities are strategically located at either end of the canal. I note in the book how the interesting Clinton administration spin on this is that there is no national security threat whatsoever, that this is purely a commercial enterprise. But when you ask people in the Pentagon who are in charge of defending our country in a conflict, you get a different story. Basically, if there were a conflict in Asia over Taiwan, large amounts of material and support equipment would go through that canal, and they don't doubt for a minute that the Chinese would hesitate to disrupt that shipping, either through sabotage or information warfare operations, crowds, whatever, subversion. They would do it. And, you know, it's not just Panama. Look in our hemisphere, they have a southern strategy. It involves Cuba. China has recently increased its military cooperation with Cuba. They've begun Chinese language and English language propaganda broadcasts from Cuba into the United States. And there are also reports that they're engaged in electronic eavesdropping of the southern United States.
Out of Lourdes.
Well, it's similar to the Russians, but it's a separate facility. And also, they're involved in Venezuela with the leftist government
Hugo Chavez.
Hugo Chavez. He's made common cause with that. And so you have this inroads. You mentioned the Bahamas. There's a container facility there, too. The strategic thinkers in the Pentagon believe that the reason could be that China is looking for a way to distract the United States. Again, if there is something going on in Asia and they want to tie us down in this hemisphere, it would be very easy for them to pull the trigger on this foundation and create big problems for the United States.
Bill, we only have a few minutes left. Would you run down, bullet by bullet, the policies of the U.S. government which have worked to the detriment of our national security and to the advantage of the Communist Chinese military?
Well, first and foremost, I would say the loosening of export controls was probably the single most damaging that caused strategic damage to the United States. Under Clinton export policies, controls on satellites were loosened, and as a result of that, satellite companies were doing business with the Chinese. Their rockets for launching satellites were unreliable, and they illegally provided the Chinese with missile technology to improve those boosters, which have gone into their long-range missiles, which are targeted at U.S. cities.
And tragically, leaders in both parties at one point supported those transfers.
That's right. But under the Clinton administration, the floodgates were opened. Supercomputers are being used to design nuclear weapons.
What about
now.
shared military information, access to U.S. military facilities by ranking Chinese generals?
Under the Pentagon's so-called military diplomacy program, espionage against China has been sharply curtailed to the point where spies in China are being told not to collect intelligence for fear of upsetting the Chinese or upsetting the diplomatic exchange program, which turns out to be a Chinese intelligence collection program. We have been bringing Chinese colonels to Harvard there. We've also brought them to military.
Guy named Blackwell is apparently going to have a key role in the Bush administration after having facilitated Chinese access to U.S. national security information.
I point out in the book that Bob Blackwell of Harvard was tried to get the Republican Party platform changed in a pro-China direction prior to the National Convention. And luckily, some conservative Hill staffers were able to thwart that attempt and get that language removed.
MFN for Red China, how does that help them?
This is, again, a real national security disaster from my point of view. This is going to facilitate China's strategic technology acquisition program in a major way. Again, if you treat China as a normal nation instead of the communist dictatorship that it is, they are going to exploit that for their own military purposes, and that's what they're after.
What about the policies that should be initiated during this new administration? What can a new president do to strengthen our security vis-a-vis Red China?
Well, I put some recommendations in the back of the book. I would caveat that by saying I'm a newspaper reporter and I don't claim to have all the answers, but I know a lot of people that have a lot of good suggestions and policies. So I put together some recommendations. Namely, we need to understand China. We don't understand it today. We don't understand its strategy and goals. We don't understand why they view us as their main enemy, at least most of our intelligence and policymakers. And so I call for an intelligence blitz, finding out what China's up to, and then developing an American strategy for dealing with China. And basically, it looks a lot like containment. And if that's the case, then I say we need to contain China. We need to find a way to coax them into renouncing communism, into recognizing the disaster that communism has brought on their own country and the danger that it poses not just to China but to the rest of the world. One unique feature is that I call for establishing an Asia-Pacific democratic community. Basically, the Chinese have a unique view of ethnic Chinese people around the world. They consider them nationalists close to China. I call for turning those people on China in a democratic direction.
That's a strength the Chinese have that the Soviets did not have.
Yes.
Stay with us. We'll be back for a final word from Bill Gertz after these messages. Hi, I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus. I'm inviting you to learn more about the Conservative Caucus, a grassroots public policy action organization that was founded in 1974. Whether you're opposed to socialized medicine, interested in making Congress more accountable, stopping the New World Order, fighting gun control, reducing taxes, or restoring America to its biblical premises and constitutional boundaries, we're the organization you're looking for. Please call the number on your screen to get more information about our work.
For more information, write the Conservative Caucus, 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180, or call 703-938-9626.
Bill Gertz, author of The China Threat. Tell us about the Beijing-Moscow axis and Communist China's aid to terrorism.
Well, basically, under the Clinton administration, what we've seen is the worst of all possible outcomes of the two main strategic threats to the United States. A new anti-U.S. alliance emerging between Moscow and Beijing. And this is something that the next administration should do everything possible to thwart. You have large amounts of weapons technology flowing to the Chinese and cash flowing from China to a bankrupt Russia. As for proliferation, this is being done consciously by the Chinese to subvert the United States under the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Bill, keep up the great work. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for watching Conservative Roundtable.